Good afternoon, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, and welcome to another exciting episode of Blether, Thegither, your weekly breakdown of news and politics from across Scotland and the world. My name is Stephen Paton, and joining me in the studio today is Angela Haggerty from Common Space, and Maggie Chapman, the co-convenor of the Scottish Green Party and one of the core members of the Scottish Independence Convention. And of course it's very relevant that you're here today because we've had some rather interesting news over the last week, which I'm sure all of our readers and viewers are very interested in as well.
The last week, the last half hour.
Yeah, last half hour, last couple of days.
Yeah.
So as always, we do want to hear your opinions throughout the show, so please do write them down into the comments section below. We will be reading them and kind of keeping track on what is being said. And as always, if you do enjoy the show, give us a wee share and help us reach a broader audience than we have before. So the big news this week was Monday morning from Bute House when First Minister Nicola Sturgeon announced that she would be going to the UK government to have a chat about getting a hold of a Section 30 order so we can instigate a second independence referendum. And this has kind of come off the back of, obviously, Scotland facing a hard Brexit that it didn't vote for, reports showing apparently another decade of Tory rule, despite the fact that Scotland doesn't vote Conservative, or at least not in large enough numbers to send anyone south of the border other than one. And basically being essentially pressed into a position where the Scottish Government has not been being listened to when it's come to negotiations around Brexit and finding a deal for Scotland that works and that represents what the people of Scotland ultimately voted for, both in the EU referendum and prior to that in the Holyrood elections. So we've come to this position where another referendum is probably on the cards for the future. So Maggie, obviously with the Scottish Independence Convention, we're going to be looking at another campaign coming up. Indeed. And we're going to talk about some of the more recent developments of the last half hour in a little bit. But first of all, what's kind of been the feeling with the Independence Convention?
I think one of the things we've been keen to be sure about is that this campaign for the next independence referendum has got to be genuinely inclusive of all sectors of the Yes movement, and we want to make sure that we are ready to go when that Section 30 order is agreed, if it's agreed. And what that means for us, we know that there were unanswered questions from last time. We know that although the then SNP government put together its plan for Scotland's future, there were unanswered questions in there. There were things people weren't happy about. There were things that still needed debate and discussion and decision. And that's the focus of our work within the Independence Convention. We are getting ready for the next independence referendum to make sure we've got the people that we need on board, that we've got the answers to the questions that people have, and we know how to reach every street in Scotland to make sure we get that message across.
Great. And what do you think another campaign looks like? Because one of the things I think there's been concerns around has been that it'll be too focused on being about the EU. I mean, do you think the next campaign will look at that, or do you think it will be a bit more careful?
I mean, I think the next referendum can't not include discussion around Brexit and what that means for Scotland, what that means for the whole of the British Isles, really. But from our point of view, yes, Brexit may be the material change in circumstances that make this next referendum, I think, inevitable. But it's about what kind of future do we want for Scotland? We see Scottish politics and the rest of the UK politics diverging. We see a difference happening in the way we approach the world, whether that world is focused on Europe or whether that world is wider. We don't want to see Scotland being a country that is inward-looking and isolationist. We don't want to see a Scotland that focuses only on itself, but a Scotland that can take a stand on the world stage, in the world, as an equal member of that global society. And I think that's where the relevance of Brexit comes into it. It's indicative of that diverging politics between us and certainly, for example, England.
And so kind of coming into what's been happening for the last 30 minutes, for anyone watching who hasn't necessarily picked up on that, I'll actually come over to Angela, who knows a little bit more about it and has been kind of following that. What's been happening in the last 30 minutes, Angela?
Yeah, I mean, it's only just, it was one of those things that happened just as you were about to leave the office, which is always really helpful. But it seems to be basically there's been a response now from the UK government to what Nicola Sturgeon said on Monday, and it's come in the form of a pre-recorded TV interview with Theresa May and a press conference with Scottish Secretary David Mundell and Scottish Tory leader Ruth Davidson. Now, I think Theresa May has basically said that now is not the time. she's putting across that line, but in a much lighter way, I would say, than David Mundell, who seems to have come out and quite boldly said that the UK government will not enter into negotiations with the Scottish government for a second independence referendum, full stop. So that seems to be stopping short of saying that they just won't do it before Brexit. That's just saying no on the basis that the Scottish government does not have a mandate based on the last election. So that would imply maybe that the Tories are going to try and push it to an election issue in Scotland, possibly to the next Scottish elections, and say, you know, that's been floated, the idea that the SNP would have to get an outright majority for a second independence referendum. Already, social media has gone nuts. As you can imagine, as it does. But this is, I've got to say though, it's the first time on my timeline that people have started to use the word dictatorship. But that's how this is going to go down, I would expect. I mean, this is basically the Tories saying that a vote in the Scottish Parliament next week, which will back a Scottish independence referendum, we know that because the SNP and the Scottish Greens will vote for that, so that gives the majority, the parliamentary majority, that the Tories will deny that. That's in direct defiance of the will of the Scottish Parliament, which carries out the will of the Scottish people. That's serious. I mean, that is really serious stuff. So, as I said, Twitter, Facebook, everything was just starting to go mad. Maggie, I know that you've pretty much just come out of a meeting yourself, so you're still catching up with things. But what's your initial response to all that?
I think it's indicative of a refusal from Westminster and everything that Westminster stands for to take Scotland seriously. Theresa May last year was talking about, you know, all 4 countries of the United Kingdom being equal partners in these discussions, equal partners in these negotiations, and this is a slap in the face and telling us to get back into our little box and stay there and don't utter a word. I think the idea that 62% of Scottish people can just be ignored is outrageous, and it is the definition of an anti-democratic act by the UK government, saying that there is no possibility even for those discussions to take place. As a member of the Smith Commission a couple of years ago, after the last independence referendum, there was a very, very clear agreement that, oh yes, the Scottish Government had a role to play in decisions that affected the whole of the country. So the Scottish Government was there, the Scottish Parliament was an important part of British democracy. Today, that statement today belies that, and to me says actually the Scottish Parliament is worthless and meaningless to those in power in Westminster. And that is something that I think in Scotland we need to take very seriously, because it undermines everything that devolution was intended to stand for, and it certainly undermines any vote that will take place in Holyrood next week with more than half of the Scottish parliamentarians represented.
That's the Nicola Sturgeon, I think, has released a statement as well in the last few minutes, and the word you used there, outrageous, is similarly Nicola Sturgeon has said for much the same reasons. But critics would say that, well, you know, the SNP doesn't actually have it yet. Yes, they might have had that in their manifesto about a material change in circumstances, but they didn't get an outright majority in the Parliament. And anyway, the Scottish Parliament doesn't hold the legal power to call a referendum. That's always been the agreement, that's always been the arrangement. There will be attempts at defending this move. So how would you answer some of those points?
I mean, I think, yes, what you say about the legality is all right, but how anybody can stand up and say that a majority of representatives in the Scottish Parliament don't speak for the majority of the Scottish people. I mean, that's saying that how people voted in the Holyrood elections in May last year doesn't count. And that undermines not only the powers that have come to the Scottish Parliament since devolution, but it undermines the principle of devolution itself. And that idea that actually the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is 4 countries. If we are just Westminster and what Westminster says goes, that's not a united kingdom of 4 different countries. That is a very, very clear message that London is sending us, that is saying, shut up and get back in your box. And that is anti-democratic. And I think, to me, that's worrying on a very profound level. You know, yes, it's outrageous politicking on behalf of the Conservatives now, but it speaks of something much, much more fundamentally wrong with our democracy in this country.
And if we bring it back to almost this argument about there's no mandate for it, and you're kind of talking about that there, specifically like parliamentarians not being listened to, and one of the things that I found rather frustrating is this almost repetition that's coming from the Tory party at the moment, is that there's just no mandate for a second referendum. But I don't... No matter where you stand in politics, that's just objectively wrong. I mean, if you look at the Scottish Parliament, as you say, it's a pro-independence majority.
Yep.
Not only that, of the two parties who arguably are working together to bring about independence, both the SNP and the Scottish Green Party, in both their manifestos there was a clear commitment to holding and campaigning for a second referendum in the event of, with material change being the SNP's kind of direct wording, and with the Greens whenever there was something that indicated that there was at least a desire to have another referendum and another discussion around that. And in both those examples there is clear and sustained willpower for this discussion to begin now, and I think you're right to say that that's being overlooked when it's almost like dismissed as just, oh, there's no mandate for it, there's no reason to go ahead for it. So I guess as someone working within the convention, my question then would be, like, as they're dismissing it, what do you think the next steps could possibly be? We've got a couple of people in the comment section, and we do want to keep getting your comments throughout this of what you think of this. A few people are suggesting UDI. I don't think it's a universal declaration of independence. I don't personally think that's
we're all being
calm
at the moment.
Yeah, just straight to UDI. That's the way to go. But
coming from Zimbabwe, a country that did declare UDI a few decades ago, it's not maybe the best line open for us.
But so I guess my question then is, what do you think would be the next kind of logical and coherent steps of if Westminster says no, we're not going to have this referendum within the timeline that you're putting out there? I mean, what do we do?
I think, firstly, we need to see, is there a discussion in Holyrood in the Scottish Parliament next week? If there is, as Angela said, there will be a vote, and the vote to seek.
Nicola Sturgeon's statement talked about the vote next week, so obviously
that's going to happen. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see if what we saw today from the Conservatives saying, oh, no question. With a direct request from one parliament to another, if they then turn that down, I think that could be a game changer in how people on the street mobilise, how people decide to act. We've traditionally, I think, not been a country that is motivated to radical action. But there are people saying, why aren't we on the streets now, demanding that the Conservatives listen to Scotland? Why aren't we demanding that they take these concerns seriously? And I think it's very, very, in some ways it's very dangerous territory we could be stepping into with this. For me, fundamentally, the whole question of independence, the whole question of another referendum, the whole question of determining Scotland's future is one that comes down to democracy, and it's about what the people want of their parliamentarians. They had a vote in May last year that determined a pro-independence majority in Scotland. We voted in June last year to say we wanted to remain part of the European Union, and for Westminster to turn around and say no, I think sparks a complete change in the way we relate to Westminster and to London politics.
So do you think that we could well see demonstrations, protests?
I would be very surprised if we didn't. I would be very, very surprised if we didn't. I know there are things, in the pipeline already for sort of just rallying calls, and those I'm sure will turn into a much more aggressive, not necessarily violently aggressive, but aggressive. You will listen to us. It is time you listened to us, and you will listen to us now.
I wouldn't be surprised if there's people in George Square tonight after work.
It's possible. Yep.
On the other hand, though, Maggie, that this could just be the UK government, as you said earlier, playing politics and going to, okay, if this is Nicola Sturgeon's negotiating position, then we're going to go further than everyone expects us to go, and actually that they will soften at some point. Which will then look like a sort of a concession on their part, as though the Scottish Government has won something, even if it's not what Nicola Sturgeon wanted originally. So do you think there's a possibility that a lot of this is about a talk at the moment, and that we might see a change in position over time?
I think there is that possibility, and in some ways I think many of us will be holding on to the hope that there is that possibility, because we don't want things to turn nasty. What's been very clear, though, over the last few months from Theresa May and her government is that Scotland really doesn't matter to them. Scotland's voice doesn't matter to them. The Scottish Parliament, the devolution settlement and agreements that have evolved over the last couple of decades don't matter to them. And that, to me, is concerning. But yes, as you say, Theresa May on Monday said that Nicola Sturgeon's statement had taken her by surprise. That shows you how out of touch with Scottish politics she really is. And for me, as a member of the Independence Convention, but also as a member of the Scottish Greens, that's where we need to be focusing. We need to be making sure that people's voices are heard in this discussion, and we need to be the conduits and the channels to enable people to express their views on Scotland's future, on Brexit, on a whole range of different things. Because fundamentally what we're talking about is Scotland's democratic future here.
And if we're talking about, I guess, some of the fallout coming from Brexit and the EU as well, I think one of the other kind of issues that's become quite contentious in the last couple of days is this discussion around what are reserved and what are devolved matters. So kind of underneath the Act kind of governing the Scottish Parliament, anything that is not legislated to be reserved at Westminster is devolved. That is the state of it. And the powers coming back from Brexit over the next period of time are not specifically reserved, which means in theory they should be devolved. But of course, Theresa May is now saying, actually, maybe we need to find out where these lie and where they should go, which means that there is actually a specific move just now by the Conservative Party to take powers that are technically devolved back into Westminster. And this is something we talked about the other week, and at the time I hadn't quite viewed it as that, but the more I've looked at it, the more I think actually technically those powers do lie with the Scottish Parliament. It's just that they have been given to the EU Parliament within the kind of like whatever that construction is. So we do have a situation right now where Brexit is seeing powers that are devolved to the Scottish Parliament being taken back by Westminster, while Scotland voted to remain in the EU and is now being told, actually, you're going to have to just suck it up and go with what we voted for, and accept that that's the will, and then maybe after the damage of Brexit is done, we can talk about whether or not you want to leave then. And that just, I think, is exactly what you're saying. It very much has this strange either contempt or just completely overlooking what is going on in Scotland, which is definitely the first time that's happened. Something that's actually quite interesting, I think, as well, is looking at how the press has reacted in the last couple of days as well. The Telegraph specifically, which led with its bizarre rant about cutting off Nicola Sturgeon's head.
This was an Alison Pearson article that declared Nicola Sturgeon a liar and a traitor, off with her head. Now, I think off with her head is a sort of a flippant, it can be a flippant term, but I think when it's a newspaper headline, particularly when a female MP was murdered in broad daylight last year, that's it. You have to be very, very careful. I think it's appalling that ever got through an editor. Speaking as an editor, I'm stunned that got through as an editor. They did change it the next day, but not before the damage had been done. Yeah,
and Pearson as well, also on Twitter, was saying that the Sturgeon has signed her death warrant as well. Just the same really problematic language kind of being continued on. And I'm curious, like, do either of you think, as Independence Convention, media, is this kind of a tone that we're likely to see continue on with whatever happens in terms of whether or not we get a date for a referendum, or whether or not there's a continuing campaign to get another referendum? Are we likely to see a press that is almost actively more hostile than it was the last time towards the concept of independence?
Yeah, I think we are, and I think and particularly in the aftermath of Brexit, where we have seen some of the particular, I know I'm always singling them out, but there's good reason to, the Daily Express, the Daily Mail and the Sun, their rhetoric has just has gone off the scale even for them compared to what it was pre-Brexit, in my view. So I think it has become a lot more hostile. There's been that kind of talk of traitors throughout the Brexit process so far, and I think in Scotland we're probably likely to see more of that on the way. Not from the Scottish media, I don't think, though. I mean, I don't think the Scottish media generally, regardless of what side they came down on the last time, they didn't resort to that type of conversation. I do think we had generally a much healthier conversation in Scotland right throughout, and the media does play a role in that. It can set the tone of the language of what's considered to be an acceptable way to speak to each other, and I think the Scottish media actually does a far better job on that front. It's probably going to be more of the UK media we could see it bleed through to Scottish media through things like the Scottish edition of The Sun or the Scottish Daily Mail, for example. It's possible. But I think that this time around is going to be, there's going to be a lot of dirty tricks, if you want to call it that. I think you're going to see a lot of negativity pouring into this debate. It's going to be a lot more fraught in a lot of ways. And, you know, I would just say to the Yes people watching, you know, you can play a role in that. You can be aware of that and actively try and combat it by thinking about how you conduct yourself throughout this debate and stopping yourself from getting into I know how easy it is, but stopping yourself from getting into a rage, from flying off the handle, from having that argument on Facebook for 3 hours that you don't really have to have and you know you're never going to win. You know, there are things that you can do, and I think that the Yes movement probably bears an even greater responsibility to try and lift the tone of things, because if Yes wins, then that's what's going to be building the New Scotland, and I think that, you know, that you start as you mean to go on, basically.
No, I mean, I think that's absolutely true. That we on the Yes side need to make sure that we are arguing on matters of principle, on matters of policy, on matters of fact, and not degenerating into the awfulness that we've seen from the Telegraph and from others. I think it's interesting though. We've heard a lot of talk from Theresa May and from others about divisiveness, and there's that saying. What is it? Predict trouble, cause trouble, say I told you so. And that seems to be exactly what Theresa May is doing with the help of the English-focused media. You know, it's with that kind of headline off with her head, death threats, a death warrant, all of this kind of thing. It's, well, you know, then if there is nastiness, well, it was our fault all along on the Yes side, and that's really. They are the ones laying the seeds of this discontent, and I think it's as you say, it's up to us to make sure that we squash that wherever we can, whilst rebutting it, you know, very very clearly in no uncertain terms, saying that it's okay that we say a democratically elected head of parliament, may not be head of state as those of us who want independence might wish, but the leader of the Scottish Parliament to be insulted in that way from somebody who claims that we're all part of the same country, we want to be part of the same future. To me, that indicates the utter contempt with which they treat and think of Scotland.
Now, if we look back at the last few months, when I say the last few months, I'd actually argue going back to like 2014 and coming forward from there, it seems like there has been continuous missteps from the UK government. I'd argue that the reason that how we got from 2014 to now, where we're discussing another referendum and trying to have a date set for it, rather than it being like 10 years, which was probably a more realistic estimate following afterwards, is because it just came from like misstep to misstep. It was David Cameron the morning after saying, all right, that's the referendum out the way, let's have a chat about English votes for English laws. I mean, why then? Why choose that morning to bring that up? Anyway, and just like going from there and kind of coming along, even the way that Brexit's been handled, how the Brexit referendum was handled, how the aftermath of the Brexit referendum has been handled, and basically overlooking Scotland's attempts to have conversations on how we can maybe work out an agreement that kind of benefits everyone as an equal nations should have done, all the way up until this moment right now, where they're now talking about just saying no, you're not going to have this another referendum. I mean, do you think that's likely to bring more people over to the Yes side, or is it going to maybe have not that effect, but it's going to definitely bolster those who are already voting Yes?
I mean, I think it has the potential to do both those things, but certainly in the first instance, I think it's making people angry, because even people who voted no to Scottish independence, but still believe in devolution, still believe in the power of the Scottish Parliament, still believe that the discussions that took place over the last few years, including within the Smith Commission process, that those discussions were all entered into in good faith. They should be rightly pissed off by all of this, if it's okay to say that, because really, what we see today is a belittling of all of those discussions. It's a negating of the good faith that we saw maybe more from some than from others within the Smith Commission process, and the discussions that have happened consequently to that. But to me, it makes me angry first, and then, as Angela was saying about how we respond to the media comments about off with her head, on the yes side, we need to make sure that we take that anger and channel it into something that is creative, that brings people along with us, and say, okay, if that's what you're saying now, what are the levers that we have? How can we convince people otherwise, whether those people are media, Westminster politicians, communities across Scotland? But that's where we need to channel that energy now, because we can't meet Westminster with that same animosity. That's not going to get us anywhere. I think we need to be assertive and strong in our convictions that we are campaigning for another independence referendum because we want to see a different kind of Scotland, a Scotland that is based on a set of principles that Westminster has, in this week, shown it does not hold true. And that's what matters to me, and I'm sure that's the common ground that we can find across the Yes movement, regardless of party affiliation or any sort of political allegiance.
And the other kind of almost, I hesitate to say enjoyable irony, but I'd agree with it as well as this whole kind of argument that Scotland is being asked to take a punt into the dark, which was kind of one of the phrases that's come up, I think, from Monday earlier on. It's like that we're being asked to vote blind, and it's just kind of like, are you aware of Brexit and what's going on there? I mean, the other day when we had David Davis having a chat, which I kind of want to bring this onto a little bit, but that amazing kind of interrogation with David Davis was like, what about people from the UK who've gone abroad? Are they still going to have the European health insurance cards? It's like, oh, I haven't looked at that yet. So, oh, okay, well, what about the economic assessment? Oh, I haven't done one of them yet. It's just like, it's as if they've been kind of like wasting all this time doing almost nothing. And it seems so strange to me that they're talking about, oh, well, Scotland, you kind of just take a punt in this and not know what's going on. Well, at the same time, they're doing the exact same thing.
I agree with that, but at the same time, if you put yourself in the shoes of no voters or undecided voters who are really not sure about very particular things, despite who's delivering that message can still play on those doubts, and they do have like legitimate things to feel like they would be taking a bit of a stab in the dark when it comes to things like currency, pensions, social security. There aren't clear answers yet. On those things that the Yes campaign just sort of generally trots out every time that they're brought up. So, and people are aware of that. They know that they can't find a clear answer for this thing. If there was a clear answer, it would be getting delivered to them, and it's obviously not there. So, we could criticise the Tories all day long for the incredible failures around Brexit. That we could do dedicated programmes to that, Stephen, and I think we'd get a good audience. But the key now, I suppose, for you, Maggie, as part of the Scottish Independence Convention, is that you have to sort of forget all that for a minute and think, well, what is your responsibility as part of the independence movement to make sure that you have an answer to those questions, because you have to deliver that in an independent Scotland.
No, absolutely. And we're putting together research teams. We are drawing on research that we know already exists to make sure we can answer those questions on social security, on pensions, on currency. Because in some ways, I think, neither option is clear. In 2014, when people voted yes or no, yes was then, I think, very clearly much more of a punt into the unknown, into the dark, rather than some kind of status quo, although we were told it wouldn't be the status quo. Now, the options for Scotland's future, in or out of the European Union, in or out of the United Kingdom, none of those is clear. The future of none of those is clear. And I think, yes, we've got a responsibility to answer and to present the evidence and the material and to do the convincing based on that evidence and material for people. But I think there's also a responsibility on all sides to make sure that there are answers for questions. We aren't going to know. Nicola Sturgeon said, let's have an independence referendum 18 to 24 months from now. We aren't going to know some of the economic consequences of Brexit probably for a generation. You know, does that mean Scotland's going to wait that long to find out? And personally, for me, and I think for many in the Scottish Greens, and probably most in the Scottish Independence Convention as well, we can't afford to wait that long, because that's too long. We already know some of the early economic analysis that's been done under Brexit. Scotland could lose 80,000 jobs or more. People will see their annual salaries decrease by £2,000 a year. You know, that's a significant loss, a significant penalty to Scotland for something we did not vote for. And I think we need that information. We need to get that information out to people, but that information needs to be robust, and that's some of the work that the Independence Convention is beginning to undertake.
What about those yes voters that voted Leave, though? I mean, some of them feel like they're suddenly not part of the debate anymore. They stuck in the middle.
And I think from the Independence Convention point of view, we really want to hear from them, and we want to hear and understand the reasons for leaving, for voting Leave. You know, we know some of the reasons, but are there ways that an independent Scotland can mitigate some of those, that we would actually have more power as an independent country member state of the European Union, that would make some of those fears void? Is it because of the disparity of power between Westminster and Holyrood within the EU that motivated some of those Leave voters? And you know, we've got some of that information, but we don't have it all. And I think we need to do research. We need to speak to people. We need people to speak to us, to make sure we understand, as you say, that little pocket of yes Leave voters. What is it that motivated them to vote in those two ways? Does independence solve some of those problems? Were they Leave voters because we were still part of the UK? You know, so I think it's not a simple, here's a little box of voters that we can understand. People's motivations are very complex, and we need to tease that and tease that out, unpick it. And
well, there you go, folks. If you're a Leave voter and a yes voter, the SIC want to hear from you.
Please do.
Yeah, excellent. I guess we'll have to wait to see how this debate and vote goes next week in Parliament as well, and maybe we'll have a clearer idea of I guess where politically the country's kind of moving following this news from Westminster. But you know, if you are out and about in the streets and campaigning tonight, also let us know about that as well, because we'd like to be kept up to date on what is going on. Absolutely. So kind of to move on from the kind of big news of this week, at the weekend there, we also had the Scottish Green Party conference.
We did.
Which I think went really well. The thing I enjoyed, or one of the things I really enjoyed about the conference this year, was that the Lib Dems and Labour both came out attacking the Greens, and are basically using the same weird criticism they are of the SNP just now, which is get on with the day job. Where Labour are like, well, we're more Green than the Greens now because the Greens are too busy with independence, and they like to get on with Green policies. I've just found it really fascinating that they're basically using the same argument regardless of which party they're applying it to now. Is kind of a bit of fun. But what happened at conference?
For us, our conference was exactly that. It was getting on with the day job. We have local elections coming up in May. It's 7 weeks' time, I think, something like that. And our focus was very, very clearly about those local elections. We are wanting to use these elections to get more Green councillors elected across Scotland. We've had councillors since 2007, but concentrated in just a few local authorities, and we want to see Greens in councils across the country, because we think Greens can make a real difference to local communities and can use their position in local councils to put power back in people's hands, to give people the say over how their social care services are delivered, to give people a say in how local budgets are spent, to give people a say in what local priorities matter to their local communities. So it's not just up to the politicians, that we actually engage in in participation and participative democracy in our country, to make our communities stronger, to make our decisions better, and to make our futures better.
You're going to have a real battle on your hands running a local election campaign in the next 7 weeks.
I know. It's already difficult, but the irony is the very people who are saying to us and to the SNP, get on with a day job, are the people who are championing about another independence referendum, and we are saying, let's talk about local politics. Let's talk about the dire situation that many of our health and social care services are in. The fact that we have people who cannot get access to the social care services that they need because they've been cut. Because of decades of underfunding, because of the SNP's council tax freeze, because of a whole range of different issues over the last year, decade. Local government has been poorly supported for a long time now, and where Greens have been able to get into local councils, they've been able to stand with communities and fight for them and let their voices be heard. And for us, that's what matters, and certainly that's the focus of. Well, that's what we are going to try and make the focus of our attentions over the coming 7 weeks, because the 4th of May does matter, and it matters for exactly those reasons: how we educate our children, how we care for our elderly people, how we look after those who are on housing benefit, how we keep our streets clean, how we keep our parks and open spaces and our libraries open. Those are the sorts of things that people are voting on the 4th of May, and those are the things we really care about. And
local elections, I think the UK has, or maybe more specifically at the moment, Scotland has a really interesting relationship with local elections, and that we tend to have some of the lowest turnouts for voters in them. And Scotland's kind of, in comparison to Europe, like the way we approach local elections is mad. Yep. Like the sheer number of people, which actually was discussed at the Greens conference as well, about kind of like how many people are in a council area in Scotland compared to other similar countries in Europe.
In Scotland we have the least local government. We have decisions being made by people and affecting communities, affecting neighbourhoods or council areas or wards that are bigger than anywhere else in Europe. And that's a real problem, because it means that people are less connected to that decision-making structure. They have less power, they have less say, and that's problematic. If we're up to the Greens, I think we would have a radically different kind of local government. It would be based very clearly on local communities, not on wards whose boundaries slice through communities, where neighbourhoods are split up, where they aren't based on a sense of identity. They don't map onto service delivery areas in any meaningful way either. And those are fundamental problems. Those are structural problems which we can't fix overnight. But we know that having Greens in local councils really does make a difference, because they can use the levers of power that are there to hand power back to communities.
And of course, over the next couple of weeks, we will be doing lots of coverage of the local elections, as well as speaking to all the parties to find out what they are wanting to offer people in the run-up to them. But that is starting to bring us towards the end of the show. So
I have one more question.
Do you have another question?
Yeah,
okay, yeah,
just
do it.
The local elections, because I'm just curious about the fact that I think Theresa May had sort of hinted at the idea of trying to force the local elections into another battle on the constitutional question. So if you're going to local council level and speaking to people out there and canvassing for votes and all the kinds of things that you're talking about, presumably you have to get into conversation about the SNP government and its record. You're pro-independent and pro-independence. The SNP is pro-independence. Is there a risk that you sort of you end up kind of contradicting each other within the Yes movement, but the Tories and Labour hold firm and kind of stay on that constitutional thing, and that actually not one harms you at the local level, but two kind of could harm you at the bigger constitutional level? I'm just curious as to the kind of what the unionist strategy might be there, and how you would combat that if that turns out to be the case.
I mean, I think firstly on Theresa May's comment about make sure you use your vote on the 4th of May to say no to independence. That's insulting. That's insulting to council workers, that's insulting to councillors of all political persuasions, it's insulting to people who work hard to deliver services locally. Because it's not Westminster who decides on those services, it's not Holyrood who decides on those services. Yes, there are funding mechanisms that Westminster and Holyrood control that affect those services, but the people who decide on those services are local councillors, councillors in communities across Scotland, and that's really what we need to be talking about. It's how we get the best people with policies to deliver the kinds of services and the way of delivering those services that people want. Is there a tension between between us wanting to talk about local issues, which, as you say, might bring us into conflict with everyone? Yes, there is, but politics is nothing if not tension, and having to argue and having to get your point across. You know, there are examples where the SNP and, for example, Labour have been coalition administrations in councils in Scotland, and you know, it's important that people understand and that we enable people and support people to understand that there are issues that are absolutely nothing to do with the constitutional question that determine how often your streets are swept, how many libraries you have open in your local authority area. Those cut across party lines, and you know, if you can have the SNP and Labour sharing council power, then that entrenched unionist or nationalist pro or anti-independence position, I think people aren't daft. They can understand that there's a difference with what happens in Westminster, Holyrood, and at local levels. And I think, you know, I started off by saying Theresa May's comments are insulting to local government, to local authorities, to councillors, to communities, to service providers. They're insulting to the Scottish people. You know, the Scottish people can understand, you know, that it's the council that runs their local bus service, if they're lucky enough to have a local bus service that's run and owned by their local council. It's their council that, in conjunction with their local NHS services, provides their health and social care. You know, it's insulting, I think, to the people of Scotland to say, no, you use these elections to vote on something that is completely irrelevant on the day, but that will give the Greens or the SNP a good kicking. Quite frankly, I think she does herself down when she says that. She does politics down and she does Scotland down.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Maggie. It was excellent to have you on today. And thank you also to Angela for joining me again. And thank you to all of you as well for tuning in and watching us today. We've had quite a high view number. I imagine that's because everyone's really excited to learn what's going on with a potential future referendum. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for commenting. We will be back again at 3 p.m. next Thursday as well, so please do tune in then. And for anyone who's interested, there will be a short video coming out at some point relatively soon that I'm going to do on how the voting system works for the council elections. So you've got that to look forward to.
Excellent.
I know, that's going to be fun. So thank you very much for tuning in, guys. We'll see you again next week at 3 p.m. And until then, you know, please do keep an eye on our Facebook page and everything else, as well as keeping an eye on comment space. And I guess if you want to find out more about the Greens election,
please get in touch. Have a look. Scottish Greens. You know, we've got manifestos for local areas. We've got a national manifesto coming up soon as well. Please do keep an eye out. Greens.scot.
Great. Like I say, we will be doing more coverage of all the parties in the lead up to the council elections. So please do keep an eye. But until next week at 3 p.m. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and we'll see you all then.
Bye.